However, Sinclair succeeded in getting the main studio rule killed by a party line vote in the Federal Communications Commission. Media companies argue that the money they save will let them serve local communities better. But these days, Sinclair is serving local communities with content like last month's commentary by former Trump advisor Sebastian Gorka, warning about the so-called deep state conspiracy undermining President Trump. And Sinclair's local stations have to run commentaries by former Trump advisor Boris Epstein, warning all local communities that there's too much national coverage of Stormy Daniels. Last month, CNN obtained a script that Sinclair sent to their local stations, a script telling them they all had to read on air, frequently, in place of news. The promo script was all about fake news, the supposed danger of believing other news media, the kind of media that just might be critical of President Trump. Now the promos have been taped and they are on the air. A compilation video of them by Timothy Burke at Deadspin went viral this weekend. We share it with you now, not to embarrass any of the anchors here who were told they had to tape these, but because it demonstrates the grinding erasure of local viewpoints at the largest group of local stations in America. Corporate headquarters decided this was an issue of local concern in every locality. Corporate headquarters wrote the script. Corporate headquarters gave all its viewers the same voice, the same words.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities, the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. Here is the unvarnished truth. Big media corporations are in bed with big government in Washington, regardless of which party is in power, for their mutual purposes, not for the benefit of quality news coverage. News anchors looking into camera and reading a script handed down by a corporate overlord, a script meant to obscure the truth, not elucidate it, is not journalism. It is propaganda. It's Orwellian, and it is on a slippery slope towards some of history's most destructive forces. These are the means by which despots wrest power, silence dissent, and oppress the masses. To those who say this rhetoric is hyperbolic, I submit that attacking the press as honest brokers of information has been one of the constants of this administration and all those who normalize it. But this is not normal. This is not how the freedoms enshrined in our Constitution, that beloved First Amendment, is supposed to operate. So, in the spirit of answering speech with speech, let me offer my own script. I'm Dan Rather, and I'm concerned about the troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country. The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common in corporate media. More alarming, some corporate media publish these same fake stories, stories that just don't matter, without checking with their journalists first. Unfortunately, some media executives use their local platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to trying to control exactly what people think. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. Sinclair's promos, by the way, end with anchors telling viewers to email them if they think the station's coverage is unfair. But those complaints don't go to the local stations. The emails are read and replied to by employees at Sinclair headquarters. And by the way, if you're really interested in identifying fake news and figuring out what to believe, if you're truly invested in the work of being a good, informed citizen, may I respectfully offer a short primer. Number one, understand that trusting a news outlet does not mean they're perfect. No one's perfect. It means they tell you when they screw up. Number two, don't rely on just one news outlet. Number three, don't rely on just the news to understand an issue. Read books, find the experts, find out how issues are discussed outside of news. Number four, if you find yourself agreeing with everything your news outlet says, you're doing it wrong. If your news doesn't challenge you, challenge your news. Now, number five, find a commentator whose politics differ from yours, intellectually honest even though their values differ from yours. If you can't find such a person, maybe the media is not the problem. And number six, remember that what the news tells you is far less important than what they decide to talk about in the first place. If they focus on personal, salacious, and speculative stories, find a new outlet. One that drills in on issues that actually affect real lives. Your wallet and pocketbook, health and education, schools, social justice, the environment. The true test of trustworthy journalists isn't that they never make mistakes. It's whether they're willing to challenge the powers that be on behalf of those without power. Now, I want to talk about the gun debate and the Parkland voices not being heard. And I'll do that right after this. I see what we all see. The deep division, the endemic injustices, the uncertainty about our future. We have sometimes stumbled, we have sometimes fallen short. But we can review our national purpose to recognize that what unites us is far greater and stronger than all that divides us. Look, we're doing interviews over there at youtube.com/UIC-interviews, and we've done some really ones recently. So now, of course, you know the person most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Why not back him during the 2016 primaries? Why be a Democrat at all? And we're at a time where you cannot, in good conscience, sit on the sidelines of history. Laura Ingraham of Fox News apologized and took this week off after mocking one of the Parkland school shooting survivors and losing advertisers in the process. But no national TV news outlet has apologized for or even truly acknowledged the scarcity of black voices from Parkland in their discourse about guns. More than 1 in 10 Parkland students are black, but they hardly get a tenth of our attention. On Wednesday, several of them held a news conference trying to rectify that.
The Black Lives Matter movement has been addressing this topic since the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2012. Yet we have never seen this kind of support for our cause, and we surely do not feel that the lives or voices of minorities are valued as much as those of our white counterparts. I am here today with my classmates because we have been sorely underrepresented and in some cases misrepresented. We are proud to say that we're from Douglas. We are proud to say that those who are in the front are doing a great job. But we also, as you can see, have so much to say.
Yes, they do. And one thing they had to say concerned the proposed response of putting more armed officers into American schools. It's understandable that some black students might see armed security in their schools differently than many of their white schoolmates do, especially when students of African American heritage are 3 times more likely than white students to be expelled or suspended from school. Police, guns, discipline, in the eyes and minds of many black students, they do not automatically add up to safety and security. When black people, even young black people, talk about guns and violence, they are heard differently, if they are heard at all. Consider how polarizing Black Lives Matter was compared to the Parkland shootings. Imagine if the March for Our Lives had been held last year by black students. This week will mark 50 years since the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went to Memphis to support striking sanitation workers. On Wednesday, April 4th, it will be 50 years to the day since he was struck down there in Memphis by gun violence, fighting for the right of Americans to join together and to speak with one voice, fighting for the right to be heard. The battle to be heard behind the closed doors of a top American gunmaker just took a fierce turn, if an obscure SEC filing is any indication. We've reported to you before about Sturm Ruger, maker of the rifle used in the Texas church shooting last year. We revealed on this newscast, Ruger did not warn its potential investors that the company might suffer in the event of high-profile gun crimes, or if pro-gun election victories made gun sales drop, exactly what happened with President Trump. Ruger is also under pressure from its biggest investors. The private equity firm BlackRock, which owns 17% of Ruger, wrote to them last month specifically about gun violence, asking what Ruger plans to do about it and the risks to investors. Ruger's answer was nothing new. Now, as the Young Turks just reported, Ruger's latest SEC filing has the company's board of directors telling shareholders to vote against a resolution that would require Ruger to monitor violence committed with Ruger firearms and report on it by early next year. The resolution is being proposed by a socially active Catholic order in Oregon. It will be voted on by Ruger shareholders at their annual meeting next month. So will the board of directors. All 9 are up for re-election, including Chairman C. Michael Jacoby, who also sits on the board of the private prison company Core Civic, formerly known as the Corrections Corporation of America. Michael Pfeiffer, member of the board of governors of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which lobbies against his gun laws. Sandra Froman, member of the NRA's board of directors, and CEO Chris Killoy, a top NRA supporter and former Smith & Wesson executive. The whole idea of a small religious order of guns might overturn the Ruger board is unrealistic. But here's the thing. More than half of Ruger stock is owned by just 6 private financial firms. Out of Ruger's 17 million shares, BlackRock owns almost 3 million. Vanguard owns more than 1.5 million. Capital World Investors of San Francisco and the London Company of Virginia own more than 1 million shares each. And both Voya Investment Management and Dimensional Fund Advisors own well over 500,000 shares. BlackRock told you is pushing gun companies to respond to gun violence. Vanguard has said it supports legislative efforts to do so. In other words, these 6 companies on their own could force Ruger to report on its gun violence or toss out the board of directors. Because at a certain point, these gun makers are going to become toxic for anyone to own. It's not personal, Ruger. It's just business. Now, we're going to connect some dots behind President Trump firing his Veterans Affairs Secretary, and you want to hear that right after this.
All right, well, the Young Turks special election day coverage dropping.
An amazing power cut.
Look at this battle. We're talking about power.
Like a smart Destiny child.
We're all too strong.
We start a revolution. Yes, another one. Aren't you excited? Wow.
So the best writers in the country are right here on this panel, with the obvious exception of John Irola.
Let's also quickly discount Harry Potter fanfiction.
We have elected the top Twitter troll in the country. What ran me away from Christianity was judgment and condemnation.
Assaulting peaceful protesters in North Dakota. Crazier than bombing Yemen. Crazier than bombing Syria so much they ran out of bombs.
Reductive interpretation of what their motives are, what Putin's are, by these amateur experts.
We don't kill our journalists, and they do.
If you want to know what's really going on with President Trump's firing of Secretary of Veterans Affairs David Shulkin, it's important to understand who was behind it. In a stunning op-ed last week after he was fired, Shulkin said that, and I quote, advocates within the administration for privatizing VA health services saw me as an obstacle to privatization who had to be removed. That is because I am convinced that privatization is a political issue aimed at rewarding select people and companies with profits, even if it undermines care for veterans, unquote. Shulkin doesn't say who those privatization advocates are, but President Trump's plans for the VA have been leaning toward privatizing veterans' health care. A broad spectrum of veterans groups is deeply opposed to privatizing the VA. Despite its occasional scandals, the agency enjoys high satisfaction ratings from veterans, better than private providers and insurance companies do. According to a report in Politico, Trump's desire to privatize the VA has been influenced by Jeff Miller. He's former chairman of the House Veterans Committee. Miller's aide went to work for Shulkin and was reportedly one of the Trump loyalists in the VA who helped push Shulkin out. One of the people pushing for privatization is Stephen A. Cohen. He is a hedge fund billionaire and one of the richest people in the country. Until this year, he was not allowed to invest other people's money thanks to an insider trading scandal. In 2013, as prosecutors began sniffing around, Cohen started giving to veterans charities. In 2016, he founded Cohen Veterans Network, a chain of clinics offering veterans and families free or low-cost care. Free, that is, to the patients. The clinics get reimbursed when they can, and they want to get reimbursed more. Last year, Cohen spent $290,000 on lobbying for, quote, efforts to increase access to mental health care for veterans and efforts to increase federal funding for PTSD-related research, unquote. The lobbyist Cohen turned to was Jeff Miller, Trump's advisor on veterans issues. Miller is now a lobbyist. Cohen was his first client. The law prohibited Miller from lobbying Congress, and his disclosure forms indicate he was doing, quote, executive branch lobbying only. Cohen says he was motivated by his son's military service in Afghanistan. But Cohen has also thrown money at Donald Trump, including $1 million for the Trump inauguration and millions more to Republicans who favor clinics like his over the VA. And Cohen is not Miller's only client. After switching from heading the Veterans Committee in Congress to lobbying last year, he signed up several health industry companies with stakes in privatizing veterans' care, including some specifically targeted at veteran patients. Even with Shokin at the helm, Cohen locked up a partnership in February with the VA that, according to the press release, may lead to Cohen Veterans Network expanding. Look, it's a fine and noble instinct to want to expand choice and improve service for America's veterans, as it is for all Americans. But those leading the charge for this oppose funding government efforts to expand choice and improve service. Those leading the charge insist that the private sector is better at it, even while the Cohen Veterans Network admits publicly they are learning best practices from the VA. Choice, access to service, these are the words used publicly by those who privately assault the very notion of government serving any of its people for any needs the private sector can charge for. Just look at who's lining up to fill Shukin's shoes. Trump wants his own White House position, a doctor, a man who has never run a large organization. He wants him to run the VA. Until then, the president said, the VA will be run by a Pentagon undersecretary named Robert Wilkie, former advisor to Republican Senator Tom Tillis, a vocal champion of choice. Teachers walked off the job today in red states. Some analysis and commentary on what they're doing is straight ahead.
Hey Dave, as you can probably see, Skype froze. Frozen crash.
You know, I'm watching a documentary of the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing a live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts. And it didn't crash. And that was 1965, and he was in Vietnam.
Look, we're doing interviews over there at youtube.com/UIC interviews, and we've done something that really was recently. So now, of course, you know the person most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders. Why not back him during the 2016 primaries? Why be a Democrat at all? And we're at a time where you cannot, in good conscience, sit on the sidelines of history.
Finally tonight, if this country is to continue to thrive and progress, it must be led by its educators, particularly its teachers. Most specifically, its public school teachers. Listen, I respect and admire dedicated teachers wherever they teach. Public schools, private, charter, religious, and homeschools. All of them. But there is a special place in my heart, and I think there should be in the hearts of all citizens, for those who teach in our public schools. Teachers in general, but public school teachers especially, are the all too often unheralded, neglected, and underpaid backbone of this nation. And that's why I'm so inspired and encouraged by what is one of the more underreported stories of recent weeks. Something is stirring in traditionally red states. Teachers are fighting back after being pushed to desperation by years of shrinking education budgets from state capitals bent on short-sighted, tax-cut, frenzied economic policies. In West Virginia, a teacher strike led to a pay increase, and similar movements are now fomenting in Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Arizona, as we saw with mass walkouts today. Because here's the reality. Most parents, no matter their party affiliation, want good schools for their kids. Communities understand the importance of good school districts. Businesses need well-trained workers. America needs an educated populace. Sadly, public education has become a political battleground. But I believe the efforts we're seeing play out today will be successful, and that others will likely follow. We need to break our cycle of cynicism. We need to recognize the importance of education and those who dedicate themselves to these lives of service to our future generations. Public schools must be part of what unites us. Yes, this is, in addition to everything else, personal for me. I would not be where I am today without dedicated teachers who believed in me and opened my eyes to new horizons. And I know millions of my fellow citizens feel the same way. We know that we succeeded because how they have helped us. Now, they need our help, and they will succeed if we help them. With that, I leave you for this new cycle. The Young Turks is next, and we'll be back with the news at this same place and time, 5:30 Eastern, every Monday. Until then, Dan Rather reporting. Stay steady.
You. There are billions of you. But there is only one. You. So what if selecting your next vehicle is focused on what truly matters? You. Introducing Genetic Select by Lexus, the world's first service that uses human genetics to match you with the car of your genes. Through a partnership with 23andMe, using their proprietary DNA genotyping, one small saliva sample will unlock your DNA, telling us where you're from, where you're going, and now, how you're going to get there. Within 48 hours, your handcrafted Lexus will be delivered to your driveway. Based on your chromosomes, everything from the model, styling, and performance capability will be crafted exclusively for you. Inspired by your favorite scent, a genetically personalized new car smell. If your DNA markers reveal susceptibility to freckling, protected UV tinting. Even an enhanced windshield matched to your personal prescription. Genetically predisposed to high caffeine consumption, enlarged cup holders. And best of all, operating your vehicle no longer requires a key. The perfect driving experience is in our DNA, because it's also in yours. Experience craftsmanship at the genetic level. Experience amazing.
Well, the Young Turks, we have an amazing show for you guys today. I'm back. I had a vacation. We'll talk about that in the postgame a little bit. I went to Jamaica. Was I well received as Mr. Jamaica in my native land? I'll tell you all about it. tytnetwork.com/join to become a member and hear that postgame. Did I get someone to call me actually Mr. Jamaica? Did anyone know there that I was actually Mr. Jamaica? All right. We'll find out in the postgame. Anyway, that's fun for later. Today's show is both got a lot of fun stories and a lot of tragic stories. Again, it's the news. That's kind of what happens. And certainly on the Young Turks. So we're going to start out with a couple of funny ones in the first segment, but later on we're going to get more serious. The Sinclair Broadcasting story is amazing. It's a wonderful and horrific demonstration of propaganda. Hold, okay, excuse me, it's a live show. And then, speaking of tragic, no, seriously, the last story in the first hour for you guys is about Gaza. I don't want you to miss that, because what's happening there right now is both deeply troubling, but also really important, because I think we might be at a strategy that could actually work to get peace in the Middle East. I'm among the very few people who hold that point of view, but I want to give you all the facts and then give you my perspective on that a little bit later in the program. So giant show ahead. Let's go do some of the fun stories first. Okay. Congratulations, America. You have a new challenge on YouTube. Some of these could be incredibly positive. The Ice Bucket Challenge raised millions upon millions of dollars for charity. This one is not in that category. This is apparently a challenge related to condoms. There's no way this story ends well. So let's get started. First of all, this is the Sacramento Bee writing here. Educators are warning about a condom challenge being spread online by YouTube videos and social media. When educators are warning about something, okay, that involves condoms, watch out. All right, so I was thinking, condom challenge, what are they going to do with it? Uh-oh. All right, here we go. Buckle up, brace for impact. Also known as the, quote, snorting condom challenge, or condom snorting challenge. Wow, that is very different how you phrase those two things. Anyway, the fad actually dates back several years, but has recently gone viral again, educators say. Thrilling. An idea as bad as condom snorting has gone viral again. All right. Now, a different condom challenge, they explain, made the rounds back in 2015, involving videos of water-filled condoms being dropped on people's heads, drenching them, reported the debris. Okay. Have your pick of disastrous condom challenge ideas. Can you imagine having a condom filled with water dropped on your head? How that didn't lead to several shootings in America, I will never know. And thank God for that everybody was okay. But that's a terrible idea, only matched by an even worse idea, which is this condom snorting thing. Now, different news stories have this dating back to 2013 and some as early as 2007. YouTube has been trying to delete a lot of those videos because they are, in fact, a dangerous idea. But nonetheless, let me give you more important context on this story. The challenge involves snorting an unwrapped condom up one nostril, we're already having fun, then pulling the condom from the throat out the mouth, reported Newsweek. Participants typically then post a video of the completed challenge to YouTube. Well, of course, if you don't show people yourself snorting condoms on YouTube, did it really happen? Okay, you already lost me on the snorting part, but when it goes through the throat and that plastic can get stuck, that seems like a particularly bad idea. Okay, but they have to clarify. So the Sacramento Bee says snorting a condom up your nose not only poses a choking hazard, but also puts you at risk for allergic reactions and infections, reports Forbes. Forbes had to report that. I think that anybody with any degree of sense can tell that if you snort a condom through your nose and out your mouth, it could get stuck in your throat and pose a choking hazard. I'm less worried about the allergies, but if you've got condom allergies, I wouldn't snort it. Okay. They then further bothered to ask an expert, Bruce Lee. Yes, his name was actually Bruce Lee. He said, this guy's a professor. Okay, they went and talked to a professor. Anyway, even if you manage to successfully pull the condom out through your mouth, inhaling a condom up your nose would be very uncomfortable and potentially quite painful. Yes, as I said earlier, he is a professor. I love his last line here. He says, would it really be worth all that just to get more likes and views? And the resounding answer to that by the world was yes. Okay, now I disagree. I don't think that's the right way to get views. And we did once do a Harlem Shake on the Young Turks. We will not be snorting any condoms here. I think that it's a disastrous idea. As I guess the oldest partner of YouTube here at the Young Turks, it is my job as Grandpa Jay to say, get off my lawn! In other words, don't do that. That's a really bad idea. You can get really hurt. And no, it is not worth the likes and views, although apparently children across America disagree. Okay. That's just a fun little story about culture to get started with. Now we go to a fun little story about Donald Trump. Oh boy. Buckle up and brace for impact on this one, too. Okay, here we go. Now, Donald Trump was celebrating Easter at the White House, or whatever this building is, as you're about to find out. And as usual, the Easter Bunny's next to him. That's never not funny. Let's show a picture. This is always my favorite sight. And the Easter Bunny looks funny as always, creepy as always. It always makes the president look ridiculous to stand next to an Easter Bunny. It is not one of my favorite traditions at the White House. If I was a president, which is unlikely to happen, so you're going to be okay, Easter Bunny, I would ban that tradition. They say, would you like to stand next to the Easter Bunny? The answer is a resounding no. By the way, earlier in his career, the former White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, played an Easter Bunny in one of those ceremonies. That's only the most embarrassing thing I've ever heard. Okay, never play an Easter Bunny unless you're a furry. So, now, how is Donald Trump going to match all the other presidents and top them? Because all the presidents have to stand next to this ridiculous Easter Bunny. Donald Trump says, you will not out-ridiculous me. I'm going to go further here and do better than you. So, now, understand that on the lawn are children. They're about to do the Easter egg roll and the hunt and all that fun stuff. He's talking to a bunch of kids. And then he starts talking about the military. What? No, different venue, not this venue. And it appears even the Easter Bunny's a little surprised. Let's watch.
This is a special year. Our country is doing great. You look at the economy, you look at what's happening. Nothing's ever easy, but we have never had an economy like we have right now. And we're going to make it bigger and better and stronger. Our military is now at a level, will soon be at a level that it's never been before. It's, you see what's happening, and you see what's happening with funding. The funding of our military was so important, and so many military people are with us today. So just think of $700 billion, because that's all going into our military this year.
All right, we might have added the zoom in to the Easter Bunny, but I think it was well merited. He always does have a surprised look on his face. But we were all surprised when Donald Trump started going into this weird political speech. But it only gets worse. That was weird in terms of policy and the wrong venue to bring that topic up. But then he says this.
I want to thank the White House Historical Association and all of the people that work so hard with Melania, with everybody to keep this incredible house or building or whatever you want to call it, because there really is no name for it. It is special.
It's called the White House. It definitely has a name, a fairly well-known name. You live inside it. This building, whatever it's called, that's unbelievable. No, the guy's lost his mind. We're all pretending that everything's fine. This thing, whatever you call it, it looks white, looks to be some sort of a house. I don't know, I watched Fox inside in there, but God knows what it is. He's not done. One more.
And we keep it in tip-top shape. We call it sometimes tippy-top shape. And it's a great, great place.
We sometimes call it a tippy-top shape. Is that what we call it at the adult White House? He then added, I said tip-top, tippy to the tippy, the tip-tip at top, and you don't stop, a rocket out, bubba to the bang-bang boogie, boogie to the boogie, to the rhythm of the boogie to the beat. He said it. I don't know. Well, the guy is an absolute disaster, but at least he made Easter slightly more fun. Okay. Yeah, I had to look down to read it. Okay. All right. I told you the show was going to start fun. Didn't I tell you that? All right, now let's go to another fun story, and here I will randomly tell Jesus, our director, something. We're going to we'll add video 6 in here, Jesus, after graphic 11. Okay, so I just said that. All right, here we go. You know, the VA secretary used to be this guy named Shulkin, and he's been fired, or resigned, or fired, depending on what Donald Trump is thinking at this particular moment. Now, on Saturday, the White House spokesperson, Lindsay Walters, put out a statement saying Secretary Shulkin resigned from his position as Secretary of Department of Veteran Affairs. Now, wait a minute, that's not the story we heard before. We heard he was fired, and it seemed fairly definitive. But now, over the weekend, they're saying he resigned. Interesting. Well, so they asked Shulkin about it. They have him on television. And he says, I came to fight for our veterans, and I had no intention of giving up. There would be no reason for me to resign. Now, you don't often get a guy saying, no, I was definitely fired. I don't want any confusion about this. I did not resign. I was fired. But, of course, you have to correct the president because he's saying things that aren't true. Shulkin didn't say, you know what, I don't like this Veterans Affairs job. I just want to quit. No, he was fired by Trump for, some would say, legitimate reasons, some would say preposterous reasons. But is there anything that Trump does that isn't for preposterous reasons? So, HuffPost has some clarification here. Shulkin said that the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, told him he'd been terminated, quote, shortly before Trump tweeted about it on Wednesday, adding that he neither offered his resignation nor submitted a letter of resignation. He said his dismissal was somewhat of a surprise since, quote, President Trump and I actually spoke the day that he sent the tweet out just a few hours before. Look, this is what I want to drive home to you guys. Even the president doesn't know what the president thinks. It changes minute by minute. He has no principles. He has no convictions. He doesn't even have any ideas. Things pop into his head depending on whoever's last in the room or depending on the last segment on Fox and Friends. So, does he think that he fired Shulkin or does he think Shulkin resigned? I don't know. Ask him right now. Ask him a minute later. Ask him a minute later after that. And you'll have 3 different answers. The guy's a pathological liar. He cannot help himself. And he constantly gets his staff into trouble because he tells them things like, well, tell everybody he resigned. Go ahead, tell him that he resigned, okay? I didn't fire him. No. They're like, all right, okay. I saw you fire him, but all right, whatever. He resigned, right? And then later they're like, don't you feel like I fired him? That guy was a loser. I'm tired of winning. So I needed more winners, right? So we're going to get to the last flip-flop in a second, but I want to show you Shulkin on TV.
Were you fired or did you resign?
Well, I came to Washington with the commitment to make our system work better for veterans. That's the commitment that I went to work every day. I continue to feel strongly about that. There was no reason why I would resign.
So why don't you just say you were fired?
Well, I think that's the alternative to resignation. I received a phone call saying that the president wanted to make a change, and that's certainly his prerogative to do that, and that's what happened.
You received a phone call from Chief of Staff John Kelly, who fired you.
General Kelly gave me a heads up that the president would most likely be tweeting out a message in the very near future, and I appreciated having that heads up from General Kelly.
So the tweet fired you?
Yes.
This is the world we live in. But that's okay, because the White House said that he was not fired until today. We go back to HuffPost. The White House on Monday changed its story about David Shulkin's departure from the Department of Veterans Affairs, acknowledging he didn't voluntarily quit. There is a deeply unstable, pathological liar in the White House. No one has any idea what he's going to do, including himself. So, any article you see, any pundit you see that tells you about Donald Trump's theory on this, or his hypothesis on that, or his strategy on something else, understand they have no idea what they're talking about. There is no strategy. It's just a deeply unstable man stabbing in the darkness, trying to figure out what's going on. I fired him, he resigned, fire. And that guy is at the wheel. God help us all. All right, when we come back, that was actually the lighthearted stuff. We will have really important stories about the people doing propaganda for the president, and then both the tragic, and I would argue, and I'm, again, probably the only person arguing this, hopeful story about what is happening in the Gaza Strip and what it could mean for either further conflict or maybe even peace in the Middle East. We'll talk about that when we come back.
When you first thought, I'm going to be a talk show host, did you have a format in mind? Like, what was the one that you wanted?
No, and what I started with was I would cut out articles back in the day, okay, from the Washington Post, because I lived in Washington, and the USA Today, and I would
piled them up in front of me, and they were all weird angles. And this is a problem that almost no other human being has run into, maybe 13 others on the planet. What happens if you have an interesting article on both sides of the paper, on the page? So on page 8,
but you've already cut it out, and you're like,
but I was kind of I got to read the whole paper before I start cutting, and I'm like, A2, that was good. Oh no, A3 has a good one too, and this one goes like this, right? And the other one goes like that, so it's not going to work. And so those are the things I had to sort out. I wanted to put on a T-shirt from shoptyt.com.
I was surprised you didn't, but there was no time, I guess.
There was no time. I had to wolf down a half a sandwich and then come back on to do the show. And I calculated in 5 seconds that it's more of a pain in the ass to change while having Tim Collins yell at me to get on the set than it is to actually just keep the unacceptable things I'm wearing, because it's not an outfit.
We do match, sort of. I mean, we're in the same sort of. I am pushing the old school envelope. There is a wonderful thing, the sign of the growth of the company, that for these programs that happen at night, certainly for old school, that dinner is ordered. That's partially because of you. You've been here all day. Someone's got to get you something to eat, right? And obviously, if they're going to get you something to eat, the crew's here. People who work on this show should be fed. They're working a long day. So there's an order goes out from one of the delivery services like Grubhub or something, and I get an email saying you join the order, right? And then you look and you get the menu. And the first time I did it, I wanted to get. I was like, well, and I ordered something, and I'm like, well, maybe that won't be good. What about this? And I'm like, that's taking advantage of the system. And then I saw that someone else had ordered 2 full entrees, right? And so now, each week, I just try to see how much I can get.
Ben, I got news for you. You can get as much as you want, okay? Until Dave Kohler catches you.
Right. That's sort of what I mean. He's like,
right.
Are you really eating a large lentil soup and pasta and spinach with garlic and garlic bread? I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, Dave will have that conversation with you over under 9.5 months.
Yeah.
Eventually, Kohler will get you.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, but you'll have a long run before that.
I mean, I've eaten sushi before that it felt like I was eating a caterpillar. Like the whole time I couldn't believe all the bones. And I can't imagine. I'm not that adventurous for iguana.
Eating an iguana?
First of all, this is when the vegans can get angry at us for being carnivores, omnivores. I like meat. I eat meat all the time. But I can't stand eating meat of an animal that looks like the whole animal. Right? It's like right on the platter. Like if it's like a little slice of, even the fish is, you're right. Well, the fish is not as bad, but if it's like a little slice of iguana, I get it. But the whole iguana, you're just taking little chunks out of it.
I know, it feels barbaric.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, I'm going to eat a piece of its leg, and I'm going to eat a piece of its. It's just like, what? But if it doesn't look attached to an animal, you're like, oh, that's just food.
I mean, it's like chunks of the flesh rolled in dough and deep fried. Yeah, it's totally fine. But the whole
then it doesn't make
animal,
you think about the animal.
It's horrifying.
All right, back on the Young Turks. Just time for 2 tweets for you guys. Actually, one's YouTube Super Chat. Kimberly Buckley says, welcome back, Cenk. We've missed you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll add one more tweet here. Joy Division says, Trump is definitely showing the early signs of dementia. Look, man, I think he might have been that ridiculous and dumb all along, but I hear you on that. And I just want to say, Null Cookies wrote in, I love Dan Rather. Thank you for that. Dan Rather's, of course, got the show before us on Mondays on the TYT Network at 5:30 Eastern. So make sure you're checking that out every Monday. Okay, let's go over here and do some serious stories. Okay. Sinclair Broadcast Group is a right-leaning group, to say the least. It owns the most amount of television stations in America. And they recently put out a memo to their staff saying, you must read well, of course, they didn't call it propaganda, but that is exactly what it is, as you'll see in a minute. The news stories that we give you, now these stories almost all support Donald Trump and his politics. And in this one particular case, they actually talk about fake news, or what they're calling fake stories. And they're trying to say that the rest of the media is biased. Now, they're getting the media to devour itself. They're forcing their local news anchors, and these are what are called must-runs. I'll explain more about that in a second. They're forcing their local news anchors to tell you to not trust the news. That's amazing. This is one of the most audacious examples of propaganda I have ever seen in any country. So, Deadspin did a wonderful job of splicing together the different local newscasts throughout the country. And again, remember, Sinclair owns more TV stations than anyone else in the country, and they're about to do a merger where they buy even more, 40 more stations. So this is the propaganda they're putting out all across the country. They make all of their anchors say this. Now watch.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities, the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarmingly, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Indeed, it definitely is. So we find out a lot of things through this one issue and how Sinclair has done this. And this is not the only issue that they've done right-wing propaganda on. I'll give you some examples in a second as well. Again, if you want to watch the full link and the full article, click down below to Deadspin's original article on this. They did a wonderful job with this. I can't commend them enough for putting that video together. So, number one, we see political correctness here. Now, you might think political correctness is a term used to say that you shouldn't state offensive things. No, that's a twisting of the phrase used here in America by the right wing. Political correctness was something that was literal, and actually both the fascist Germans, otherwise known as the Nazis, and the Soviets under Stalin used the phrase political correctness. They would tell not only people in government, but people in news, you are not allowed to report what you think is factually correct. You must report things that are politically correct. So, the government has an opinion, that is the correct opinion, and you will report it as such. There's never been a better example of it than what you just saw. Again, the right wing does projection. They accuse the left wing of political correctness, and the minute they have an opportunity, they define the phrase. They do it so over the top that you don't need any other examples of it. Okay, so it's political correctness, it's clearly propaganda, but there's a devastating second part that people are not talking about, which is that this exposes local news for the actors that they are. And unfortunately, that's true in all the TV stations. Burgundy will read anything put in the prompter. So, here you see, and that's why I call television news anchors news actors. We don't have a prompter here. There, they put it in the prompter, and Sometimes it's real news people who work really hard, oftentimes it is, to produce a story and then put it in the prompter and then the anchor reads it. A lot of those anchors worked in the past in the field and gathered up enough expertise to become anchors. Some of them just looked the part. And they got promoted up for a variety of reasons, right? But as you see that, you realize, with the different intonations and the different delivery, the different acting schools they went to, in a sense, and that's what these consultants at the local TV stations do. They come in and they teach people that are supposed to be in news how to act the news. And then some with the concerned faces, if you notice. It is dangerous to our democracy. Now, don't get the wrong idea. A lot of the people who did this, they're not at fault. It's their bosses who literally ordered them to read it. And it is deeply embarrassing to them. But someone writes the script. In this case, it is this group that is admittedly right-wing and clearly supports Donald Trump. In other cases, it's other people writing the script. But what you see on television, unfortunately, is overwhelmingly fake. Now, more specifically to this problem, obviously, some people who worked at Sinclair, and a ton of local news people, of course, have, because, once again, they're the largest TV group in the country, and people who currently work there are deeply dismayed by what's happened. So first, let's go to Bill Mulligan. He used to work at Sinclair Broadcast Group. He now works at a different station in Los Angeles. He said, they were awful, and I would never work for them again. What they're doing now is ridiculous propaganda, and it's an embarrassment to the profession. I feel for my former colleagues being forced to read this garbage. So he is obviously very clear, but it's easier for him to say that because he doesn't get a paycheck from them right now. And, you might think, people on TV make a lot of money, and on cable news, they generally speaking do. But at local news, especially in the smaller and mid-sized markets, they do not make a lot of money. Ben Mankiewicz, who was on this show, started in local news and made $19,000 in his first job in Charleston, South Carolina. And that is not abnormal, and the prices have not gone up very much since then. And so it is hard for them to let go of that paycheck. It's easy for us sitting here to say they shouldn't do it, but then they are going to suffer economic devastation. And already their salaries are incredibly low in most of the markets that you just saw, okay? Now, let's go to a current employee at Sinclair. He says, it sickens me the way this company is encroaching upon trusted news brands in rural markets. As you can tell, I'm a little skeptical about the trusted news brands part. I think local news often does a lot of preposterous things, and I don't know why they speak the way that they do. The number of ambulances have doubled, but so have the number of accidents. Why are you talking like that? But for the people who did work hard, and there are plenty of them, there are thousands of people who worked hard and actually care about the news, and that's why they went into the profession. Now, in order to receive a check and to stay at your job, you must read this propaganda, and yes, that of course is deeply troubling. An anonymous local anchor continues that he feels bad because they're seeing these people they've trusted for decades tell them things that they know are essentially propaganda. Now, they literally had a former RT employee, a Russia Today employee, help with one of these stories on Sinclair that was then broadcast all throughout the country. They do two different things. One is they do these prepackaged pieces which they force the local stations to run. They own them, right? They're not really news, but they're put into the news shows. The second thing is they force the anchors to read them like you just saw in that video. Now, I don't care that they use a former RT employee. That's not that interesting to me. But in the midst of that, Newsweek reported that Columbia Journalism Review had described Russia Today as, quote, the Kremlin's propaganda outlet. Well, I've talked about this in the case of RT and Al Jazeera. People are right when they criticize them and say, hey, they were owned by Russia in the case of Russia Today, and Qatar in the case of Al Jazeera. And so you should be wary, especially if they're talking about those particular countries or their agendas. I think that both outlets have, at times, done very good journalism, and at times have done propaganda, no question about it. Now, how about the people that own our stations? See, that's uncomfortable, so people don't like to talk about that. Do do employees at Comcast support positions of Comcast? To say 99% of the time is probably a bit of an understatement. And the same is true of Time Warner and Disney and Sinclair. Now, in this case, is it fair to say that it is the U.S. government, the Trump administration's propaganda outlet? Well, you just saw it with your own eyes. It's more than fair. So, we throw a lot of stones in America at foreign outlets, and I understand why, and oftentimes I agree. But we should also be aware that we live in a glass house. In the case of Sinclair, a very transparent glass house, as we all see now. Let me go to another Sinclair Broadcast Group employee. He says, this is about whether they have the option to run them or not. I mean, if you're under some illusion that these news anchors can say whatever they want, and if they see that copy, go, well, that's not really news, so I'm not reading it because I'm a news professional. Let me, unfortunately, get rid of that notion in your head. And through this employee that says that they have a quote from him or a memo from him, and here it is. He says, let me be absolutely clear here. These, and it's capitalized, all caps, must run. If they do not, my job is on the line. I don't say that to scare you by any means, but I do say this so you understand how serious Sinclair Broadcasting Group is about this project. Propaganda 101. Now, the boss is pleased, and of course by the boss in this case I mean Donald Trump, who they are serving. So Trump tweets out in their defense, so funny to watch fake news networks among the most dishonest groups of people I have ever dealt with criticize Sinclair Broadcasting for being biased. Sinclair is far superior to CNN and even more fake NBC, which is a total joke. Okay, well, this is ironic. Trump talks about fake news, tells his allies they should call other stations fake news. Sinclair does a report about how all the other media does fake stories to help Donald Trump. And Trump comes out and tweets and goes, well, look at how right Sinclair is. They're not the biased ones. You guys are the biased ones for running fake news. So it's a self-perpetuating propaganda cycle. And this is how brainwashing is done on a mass scale. Finally, I want to go to this report from Newsweek to give you context on what else they're doing. Among the must-runs, Sinclair forces on its stations are commentary from former advisor to President Donald Trump, Boris Epshteyn, some of Epstein's latest Bottom Line with Boris segments, including a story that criticizes the March for Our Lives demonstrations against gun violence, but a place on why the White House's high turnover rate isn't necessarily a bad thing. And the list goes on and on. Sebastian Gorka, one of the top defenders of the president, often goes and does these news segments on Sinclair Broadcasting Group. He literally did one on the deep state. So, look, there are actual deep states in different countries at different times, but now there is a conspiracy theory among the right that there's deep state planning to do a literal violent coup of President Trump. Alex Jones says they're going to drop a 2,000-pound bomb on the White House. So these kind of lunatic conspiracy theories, Sinclair Broadcasting Group puts in a nice little package, has the president's former advisors, Gorka and Epstein, read them, and then they put it into the news hours in all of those different outlets all across the country. It is getting the media to attack itself. It's almost a forced mass media suicide. And yes, over there it looked like a hostage video. But that is what they do. They read what's in the prompter. In the case of Sinclair Broadcasting Group, if you don't know which of your stations in your market is one, look it up. It's very easy to find out. Just Google it. You'll know which ones they are. And be wary of what they're reading off the prompter, because it was written by political hatchet men for Donald Trump. Okay. I suspect we're not going to get any deals with Sinclair anytime soon. All right. We move forward. So, does brainwashing work? The right wing attacks so many of the different things that bring you facts. The media, scientists, professors in their ivory towers, journalists and now science itself, and the list goes on. Well, in the case of global warming, Donald Trump's been doing this a long time, even before he ran for president. Back in 2014, he tweeted out, this very expensive global warming, I don't know why that's in all caps. Anyway, this very expensive global warming BS has got to stop. Our planet is freezing, record low temps, and our GW scientists are stuck in ice. That was a news story back then. Was it true that we had record low temperatures across the world? No, not remotely true. If you look at the temperatures, that is not in dispute. There is an actual temperature reading that we all take, and I believe the hottest 10 years have been in the last 11 years. And I've shown you these charts over and over again. The temperature continues to rise across the world, so it is just demonstrably false. But that's never stopped Donald Trump before. In fact, back in 2012, this is where he invented the idea that it was a Chinese hoax. He said the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. So that is, of course, a lunatic conspiracy theory, but now the guy is president. So he keeps repeating it over and over and over again, and is it going to work? That's what the thrust of this story. Well, I'll get you the numbers in a second, but now that he is president, he's actually putting all this into effect as well. Trump's administration has replaced or changed references to climate change or renewable energy on websites across the federal government, studies showed. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, recently omitted any reference to climate change, sea levels rising, and global warming from its 4-year strategic plan. So now that is political correctness on global warming. You're not allowed to say what is scientifically correct. You must say what is politically correct, which is what Donald Trump believes, which is that global warming is not true. Now, do they actually believe that, Donald Trump? Well, nobody knows what Donald Trump actually believes, including Donald Trump. But the Republican Party largely, of course, does not believe that, the officials. But they are paid through campaign contributions and eventually lobbyist jobs when they're out of office by the fossil fuel industry to put out this propaganda that they know is lies. Because unlike Donald Trump, most of the other Republican officials are not that dumb, and they see their campaign check coming in from ExxonMobil and the giant lobbying groups for oil and gas, and then they do as they are told. And they tell you, oh well, the temperatures might be rising. Some of them even deny that. But it's not man-made. Exxon told me it's not man-made. Now, in reality, as I've shown you in previous episodes, ExxonMobil, back when it was just Exxon, knew that climate change was real, it was going to happen, and they've known it for decades and decades, and they covered it up. So, nonetheless, we have a political battle and debate in this country over things that are not debatable. They're facts. So let's look to see if it has gotten worse in the year of Trump. Well, Newsweek reporting here, just 35% of Republicans believe global warming was caused by humans, compared with 40% at about this time in 2017, when Trump had barely taken office. So like the ice caps, support for the idea that global warming is real is melting, at least among the Republican voters. So in just 1 year, he knocked it down from 40% to 35%. So people who previously thought that global warming was real heard Donald Trump say it isn't real, and they're like, well, I guess it must not be real then. I guess Donald Trump is smarter and a more stable genius than all the world's scientists. Well, I'm sad to report to you guys that propaganda does work. So, now, on the other end of the spectrum, among Democrats, a full 89% of Democrats, meanwhile, believed humans cause global warming. Now, you can say, well, look, then you could say the Democrats are brainwashed, because the Republicans believe one thing and the Democrats believe another. But the Democrats are, first of all, saying things that scientists are saying. It's like saying, well, you've been brainwashed to think that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Well, there's a pretty good reason for that, because it actually does equal 4. So, you say tomato, I say science. By the way, that 89% number is not comforting. The reality is, as I'll show you, on average, 97% of the world's scientists say that not only is global warming real, but it is man-made. So actually, the number should be higher for Democrats. It's too low for Democrats, let alone Republicans. All right. Now, let's give you more context and more contrast between Republicans and Democrats. 33% of Republicans said they worried a great deal or fair amount about global warming in Gallup's 2018 environmental survey. That's the survey that I've been quoting throughout. Down 3 percentage points from the year prior. 91% of Democrats were worried a great deal or fair amount. So it's just a different way of phrasing it. And I was actually heartened to find out that 1/3 of Republicans have not lost their mind yet. That's a little bit of a surprise to me. One more piece of context on that. 69% of Republicans thought the seriousness of global warming had been generally exaggerated, an uptick of 3 percentage points from the year prior. Only 4% of Democrats said global warming had been exaggerated. That's an amazing number. I'll come back to that 69% in a second. Some Republicans also doubted most scientists believe global warming is happening. Just 42% said most scientists believe global warming is occurring, down from 53% last year. So let's think about those two amazing numbers. Last year, 53% of Republicans think that at least scientists say that global warming is happening. Now, 11% of those folks, actually a higher percentage if you do the math, but 42% now go, yeah, I still believe that the scientists think that, although some of them don't believe the scientists. But that chunk in the middle there was like, I no longer think that the scientists are even saying it. Why? Based on what? Has there been a new study out that show you that scientists don't actually believe that? No. Donald Trump just kept saying it over and over again. So whatever Trump says, I believe. Dear leader says there's no global warming, then I don't believe it. And I believe all the scientists changed their minds. Look, I think that most of them have not spent a lot of time thinking about this issue. Certainly they have not spent a lot of time researching it. I hesitate to call people dumb. I think that's overused. I think that they're generally ignorant. And unfortunately, when you're in certain tribes and that ignorance has set in, it is incredibly easy to manipulate you. But look at that number. 69% of Republicans thought the seriousness of global warming had been exaggerated. 7 out of 10 Republicans looked at all the world scientists and said, scientists, what would they know? So let me show you what the scientists actually believe. This is from the publication Skeptical Science. They actually are quoting 7 different studies that studied all the other climate change studies. So these are meta-studies and their conclusion of all of the research on this topic. Depending on exactly how you measure the expert consensus, it's somewhere between 90 and 100% that agree humans are responsible for climate change, with most of our studies finding 97% consensus among publishing climate scientists. And number 2 conclusion is, the greater the climate expertise among those surveyed, the higher the consensus on human-caused global warming. So that's where you get the 97% number from. And depending on how you interpret it, it could be all the way up to 100%. But let's just stick with 97%. So finally, think about this. 7 out of 10 Republicans believe that 97% of the world's scientists are making it up. Scientists from Pakistan and Botswana and the United States and Venezuela and Finland and Japan, all across the world, all those scientists got together and decided, oh man, we're going to prank the hell out of the whole world. We'll make up temperatures. We'll say all this the scientific method we were taught. We're just kidding, man. Let's do one giant hoax. Let's pretend that the temperatures are rising, and then it'll have these effects. And then people will actually see those effects with their own eyes. Massive storms, massive fires, the droughts, etc. Man, we'll fuck the hell out of them. If they thought about it for a second, I think that I'm hoping that a lot of them would realize how monumentally preposterous that is. But they don't think about it for a second. Whatever dear leader tells them is what they think. By the way, all of this comes back to money in politics. Because if the Republicans had not been bribed all along through campaign contributions by the fossil fuel industry, if we did not allow that, there's no reason why they would have done the propaganda in the first place. Because they're on the same planet as us. And the planet is melting. And it is endangering all of us and our families from here on out. But as long as they keep getting those campaign contributions and those legalized bribes, They're going to keep lying to you. And guys like Donald Trump are the masters at lying. And at the end of the day, that has convinced about 35% of the country and an overwhelming majority of the Republican Party that science is not real. That's the sad state of affairs in America today. Okay, I have to take a break. I have the amazing story of the Gaza Strip for you guys when we return. We'll be right back, guys.
A plane had to land because there was an unnamed older gentleman on a Transavia Airlines plane, and he would not stop farting. And the two men, listen, we're going to get through this. The two men who were sitting next to this person asked him to stop passing wind. And he wouldn't. He then tried to fight them. Fair, like, come on. Like, we'll let the guy pass some wind. And when the fight broke out, the airline staff had to have an intervention from the pilot. And the plane was forced to land so police could come aboard and deal with the situation. It's pretty serious. Like, it could have been a medical condition, so, like, shame on me. They also removed two sisters from the same row who they said were misbehaving, although no flatulence is alleged on their parts. They said they were using some abusive language. Amir, we're going to get to your defense in a minute. They said we had to find our own. They said we had to find our own flights home with another airline. And all I will say is that the crew were really provocative and stirred things up. Like, there was a lot of stink aboard this flight, it seems.
Now, top. No.
We're all excited I have a new app on my phone, and you can make your dogs talk on your phone. Watch.
Hi, Steve. I was wondering if you were going to wear your sunglasses today and look like a badass Asian. I like the badass Asian.
So, is that your voice?
Can you hear that?
Yeah. Is that your voice that's
so I
converted into some sort of doggy voice?
So I do a voice for my dog.
Okay.
Right. And so then I just do that, but then you can speed it up and slow it down also. It's an app. It's called My Pet Talks or something.
Jimmy loves his dog.
I love my dog because I don't have kids. So, all the love I would give my kid, I give to my dog. And my nephews, too. Some of my nieces and nephews have screwed up, and I don't love them anymore, but but I still have I have like 35, 40 nieces and nephews, so there's a lot to choose from. And
that's the upside. That's the privilege of being an uncle.
Yeah.
You just
pick and choose.
With impunity, just get rid of children that you don't like. I'm done with you. I'm done with you. You I still like. But as a parent, you're kind of stuck with them.
Yeah, we could be nice to him. Like, no, Steph gave her car to her nephew. Mayweather will knock out Pacquiao. Floyd beats his wife.
All right, back on Young Turks. Mass Strackbine writes in, my wife and I watched the Sinclair Broadcasting viral propaganda video together and we were speechless. We are already living dystopian future. Now, there's two ways to communicate with us throughout the show. You can use hashtag TYT Live on Twitter, or you could use YouTube Super Chat. That helps the show, so we read those a little bit more frequently. John Powell on YouTube Super Chat writes in, Trump loves the uneducated. Very true. Philip Easley writes, most of the Republicans just hate science in general. Well, they didn't have to hate science. And I remember growing up, partly because I know because I was a Republican, we were taught that liberals operate out of emotion and not facts. And Ronald Reagan had that famous line that facts are stubborn things. He had kind of butchered it at one point. That's partly why he became famous. But in the beginning, he had done a Freudian slip in one speech and said facts are stupid things. Well, that's the one that stuck. And so because of that propaganda, now the Republicans are anti-science. And it is a disastrous thing to behold. All right, now, speaking of disastrous, let's go over here and do the Gaza Strip story, okay? There are now massive protests in the Gaza Strip. People are pouring in towards the border, not past the border, into Israel. The border is obviously between Gaza Strip and Israel. So they are getting to about within 200 meters or yards of the border. No one has actually crossed it, and Israel has begun to fire on them. So I'm going to give you all the details here, what has happened, why it's happened, and what my perspective on it is at the end. So the Palestinian Health Ministry, according to the Washington Post, said Monday that the number of Palestinians killed Friday rose to 18 after a 29-year-old man died of his injuries. So 18 deaths already, which is significant given that it is a protest. Okay, let's find out more. The ministry has said 758 people were wounded by live fire on Friday, a figure disputed by Brigadier General Ronan Manelis, who was an army spokesperson, who said he believes several dozen Palestinians at most were wounded by live rounds, and the rest by tear gas and rubber-coated steel pellets. Now, I want you to notice that he's not saying that 750 people didn't get injured. Some reports now have it up as high as 1,000 people. He's saying, no, we shot some of them with real bullets, and others we shot with tear gas and rubber-coated steel pellets. That doesn't make it dramatically better, and it is disputed by the Red Crescent and Palestinian Health Ministry, who say that over 600 people with bullet wounds were transported in ambulances. So, we're going to show you video in a second of the shootings, so you can make your own assessment as to whether those folks actually got shot and why they got shot. Now, let me give you more from the Post. Allegations of excessive force and unlawful shootings were prompted by the death toll Friday was the bloodiest day in Gaza since the 2014 Israel-Hamas war, and comments by military officials that, quote, the main instigators were targeted. So that's another really interesting admission, in a sense. I'm not sure they realize they're doing an admission by the Israeli Defense Forces, because they were claiming, and you'll see more of this in a second, that, hey, we're just shooting people that we have to shoot. Well, the only people you're allowed to shoot under international law are people that are putting your life in imminent threat. But if you're saying, no, I'm shooting the main instigators, well, then you're saying you're picking out people from a crowd that you'd like to shoot and executing them. So some of them get shot in the legs and survive. Obviously, you can tell by the hundreds of people who've gone to the hospital, but some of them are executed on the spot. They're dead. And in one of the videos, unfortunately, you'll see that as well. Now, the military's open fire policies came under more scrutiny as amateur videos emerged purportedly showing 2 Palestinians being shot, 1 killed and 1 wounded, while not posing any apparent immediate threat to soldiers. Now, I'm going to show you those 2 videos. Now, obviously a warning here, because one of the folks here not only gets shot, but killed. But I've got to show it to you so you understand what this actually looks like, and who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth, and whether this guy was about to cause imminent harm to an Israeli soldier. Let's watch. He died. In case you couldn't tell, the border is the large round mound in the back. He's running away from the border. He's got his back to the border. Israeli defense forces saying, well, earlier we thought he was doing terrorist acts. First of all, that's earlier. You don't get to execute people who you thought might have been doing something wrong earlier. Second of all, so what are these terrorist acts that you claim? Well, he was burning a tire. He's burning a tire 200 yards away from the border. That's what we're calling terrorism now? Look, I'll get into my take right now. So, first off, there were two guys, at least, it appears. The Israelis say this, but it's backed up to some degree by reporting on the ground. There were two guys who had opened fire on the Israeli soldiers. That's a no-brainer. The soldiers are going to fire back, and they got killed. I don't think that's an issue. Firing at the soldiers is a terrible idea. They're trying to kill them. Somebody fires at you, you get the fire back. So you put those two guys aside. Israel should look at all the killings, but that's going to be a relatively easy one, okay? But everyone else, they don't claim was firing at the soldiers. Even the Israelis don't claim they were firing at the soldiers. They say they were throwing rocks. Now, the Israelis are behind a giant mound, okay? And they're 200 meters away. If you get closer, they shoot you and kill you. So a guy is going to throw a rock 200 yards, 200 meters, and going to hurt an Israeli soldier so badly that he thinks, I got to execute the guy on the spot. Really? And I know some people are so blinded now because of the rage involved in this controversy and this endless conflict. But they think, oh yeah, if anyone is trying to throw a rock at me, I mean, think of it, that's 2 football fields. Who can throw a rock over 2 football fields? If anybody's going to try to throw a rock at me in that distance, I'm going to execute them. I'm going to shoot them dead, and that's justifiable and totally fine. I don't think they should throw rocks. I don't think they should burn tires. It's pointless. I think that they're almost there. You've got a mass demonstration there. Now, a lot of people are not going to agree with me, but I said this actually years ago, and they're now almost at a point where they're doing that idea that I talked about. Walk. Don't shoot. Don't throw rocks. Don't burn tires. Don't do anything but walk. Just walk forward. Now, that is what the Israelis are afraid of. And hence, I think what they're trying to do here is send a message. If you walk, we will execute all of you. So they've executed 18 so far. And say the 2 guys shooting, forget them, 60. Those 2 guys shooting were also human beings. But like I now said over and over, I think that's justifiable. Okay. Now I'm going to show you one other guy who they say these are all imminent threats to them. Another guy who was shot. This guy didn't die. But look at this so-called imminent threat. Now, I know for the West, because of the propaganda, anytime you hear a Muslim say Allahu Akbar, people get scared. Oh my God, what does that mean? It means God is great. I believe Christians believe that. Jews believe that. A lot of people believe that. It's just Arabic words for God is great. When you see Muslims praying, I know because of the propaganda in the West, a lot of people are like, whoa, what are they doing? They're praying. They're praying to God like you do in church. And that guy got up from a prayer and was walking back towards the encampment, not towards the border, shot in the leg. Imminent danger. Again, they're 200 meters away from the border, and the guy is walking back towards the encampment, not towards the border. Okay, there's no imminent threat here. Rights group said it is unlawful to use lethal force when protesters don't pose an imminent threat. They say that because it is absolutely true according to international law. But what has the right-wing government of Israel ever cared about international law? And then they go, I don't, like in the immortal words of Joe Scarborough about why terrorists attack the U.S. They hate us because they hate us. Or maybe they have an issue with getting shot while walking away from you. But no, you don't want to do any self-reflection. That would be a left-wing idea to do self-reflection. Hey, what can we do to fix the situation? Oh, you liberals trying to solve things. No, see if you can execute your way out of this mess. You've been trying it for 70 years now. Has it worked yet? Israel says soldiers follow strict rules of engagement, but would not say in which cases they use lethal force. So we kind of follow rules, but we're not going to tell you what rules and when. So how did all of these protests begin in the first place? The idea for the mass marches was first floated by a Gaza social media activist several months ago and was later adopted by Hamas, which seized power in Gaza in 2007. So again, I think the idea, as long as they keep it nonviolent, is brilliant. A mass of people saying this border is not legitimate. It's not to go inside in Israel do any damage. If you ask me, what I would do is I would cross the border, I'd go 100 yards, and then walk back. It is not to say we're staying. Now, they don't necessarily agree with me on that point of view. I'm going to tell you what their point here is in a second. But Israel has left them very, very little choices. We'll talk about that as well. Let me give you more context. Thousands had marched to the border at the start of a 6-week protest dubbed the Great March of Return. That's what they're calling this. Palestinians have pitched 5 camps near the border for the protest. They are demanding that refugees be allowed to return to homes that are now in Israel. And there's 5 encampments that you can see on a map across the border, and a great number of people have now showed up. In Friday's march, the Post says thousands of Palestinians, Israel estimated a turnout of 35,000 people headed towards the border area along several points. So this is as much of a mass protest as I have perhaps ever seen, certainly in this area. Now to the BBC. They report the Great March of Return protest started on Friday as of March 30th marks the Land Day, which commemorates the killing of 6 protesters by Israeli security forces during demonstrations over land confiscation in 1976. Now, that was a day of outrage back in 1976. 18 people just died, 3 times as much, but unfortunately the Palestinians have gotten used to the deaths. But here they're, of course, fighting back in largely non-violent ways. The great, overwhelming majority of the 35,000 have done nothing violent whatsoever. Now there's the picture of the Israeli soldiers. They claim an imminent threat as someone might throw a rock 200 yards away from that bunker right there, which is, of course, the border. The protest is scheduled to end on May 15th, which Palestinians call the Nakba, or the catastrophe, and which marks the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians during the conflict surrounding the creation of Israel in 1948. And of course, both sides have their different histories about who was at fault and who attacked first. And so the Palestinians will say, well, we lived there, and then they said it was now Israel, and then conflict arose, and we were driven out. The Israelis will say, the UN said we were Israel, and then they attacked us out of the blue. There's elements of absurdity to all sides of the story. Okay. And by the way, that's the same Israel that now is saying, the UN, we should never listen to the UN. If they condemn us, it's because they're all anti-Semites and always set against Israel. If they were always set against Israel, why did they vote to create Israel in the first place? Interesting question. Anyway, Gaza's continued border closure has made it increasingly difficult for Hamas to govern, as the Post explains. Life in the coastal strip has deteriorated further in recent months, with rising unemployment, grinding poverty, and daily blackouts that last for hours. So, understand what's happening. Israel and Egypt, their ally, have closed the borders to the Gaza Strip for over a decade. They say, we're not going to let anything in or out without our permission. And so it is basically the world's largest open-air prison. It houses 2 million people. They do not control their own land. They do not control their own borders. And if Israel wants to prevent weapons from coming in, that's understandable. But they've extended the blockade to everything else, and they have to request that things be allowed in, and then Israel gets to make the decision. The Palestinians are not free people. They are not allowed to make their own decisions. So, and in that embargo, those 2 million people, I mean, how in the world are you going to get a job? It's amazing that there's any employment in Gaza Strip. They're closed off from the rest of the world in this giant open-air prison, occupied, and there's never any relief. So if there is violence, they go to war. There's been 3 different wars between Israel and the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. If there is no violence, there's no reward. And now they do a protest, and then there's executions. And then they go to the UN, the Palestinians do, Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority that controls the West Bank, a different part of the Palestinian territories, goes to the UN and asks for statehood, and the Israeli right wing says, how dare you? Well, wait a minute. They can't seek a diplomatic solution. They apparently can't seek a peaceful solution. They can't seek a violent solution. That makes sense. And then some people say, well, all right, let's seek an economic solution, divestment, and the BDS movement. They go, oh my God, that's the worst of all. How dare you, you monsters. So you can't do economics, you can't do politics, you can't do diplomacy, you can't do anything. What can you do? When is this ever going to end? How long are these people going to be occupied before we realize that it isn't working? It isn't keeping Israel safer, and it's certainly not a way for human beings to live. I have, unfortunately, more context here. So now we move to Hamas. Hamas, the militant group that has controlled the Gaza Strip since 2007, does not recognize Israel's right to exist, but last year said it was ready to accept an interim Palestinian state limited to Gaza and the West Bank. Now, Hamas plays this ridiculous game where they say, no, we don't think Israel exists. You might think that, you might not think that. It's entirely irrelevant because Israel does in fact exist. They're the ones shooting at you. They're the ones that control your borders. What is this crazy game where you say, no, I don't think they exist? Now, they think that that's a clever negotiation strategy, and there in that quote you see from the Washington Post, they have signaled that they are willing in negotiations to say that Israel does in fact exist. It is a terrible negotiation strategy. The right wing in Israel then goes, see, they don't even recognize our right to exist. But you don't recognize their right to exist. That's why you're occupying them. One side, it's theoretical. The other side is incredibly real. I can't stand either one of those games. I think Hamas is totally wrong in that strategy. Ismail Haniyeh, senior political leader for Hamas, furthermore says there is no alternative to Palestine and no solution except to return. Meaning to return to Israel proper and get their homes back. I know a lot of Palestinians feel deeply that is the right and moral solution. And they are not going to like what I'm going to say next. That is totally unrealistic. There might be, in negotiations, some symbolic right to return for a couple of grandmothers and grandfathers. But you are not going to return millions of people into Israel proper. It's just not going to happen. We need to have a negotiated solution. We must end the occupation. But the alternative cannot be unrealistic solutions. I know, you're supposed to hammer this out in negotiations, but they won't do negotiations. Now, Israel says the Palestinians won't, the Palestinians say Israel won't. But you ask even U.S. representatives like John Kerry, our Secretary of State, and it is exceedingly clear, even though the U.S. is a massive ally of Israel, it is exceedingly clear from their comments that it is the right-wing, not all of Israel, it is the right-wing government of Israel that currently occupies power that has no interest in negotiations. They're talking about two-state. Some are saying in Israel in the right wing, no, not two-state, one state. We occupy them forever. Something maybe we'll just even take that land and we'll expand our settlements further and further and further. Because now you have fundamentalist religious zealots on the Muslim side, but you also now have fundamentalist religious zealots on the Israeli side who say, God promised it to me 2,500 years ago. And Yahweh says it's mine, so I don't care about your family. They're in my way. And This brutal occupation continues and continues. Now we go to Major General Eyal Zamir for Israel. He says, we are identifying attempts to carry out terror attacks under the camouflage of riots. But wait, you just told me there's 35,000 people there, and I saw the pictures, I saw the videos. 35,000 people are not rioting. There are definitely some people throwing rocks and the tires, as I explained, but not all 35,000, not even the majority, not even close to the overwhelming majority. So it is largely a protest, a peaceful protest. So if the terrorism is disguised in the form of a riot and disguised in the form of a protest. Well, if you can't protest, what can you do? Nothing. Just bow your head and accept the occupation. That appears to be the right-wing Israeli position. They say that a 100-meter wide area in Gaza along the fence had been defined as a no-go zone. In reality, it is about 200 meters. And a no-go zone does not mean you get to execute everybody in it, but that apparently is their interpretation. Earlier on Friday, in a separate incident, by the way, you saw the dangerous guys in the video. Well, this guy, apparently even more dangerous. Earlier on Friday, in a separate incident, a Palestinian farmer identified as Amr Samur, 27 years old, was killed by an Israeli tank shell while he was working his field before dawn in southern Gaza, the Palestinian Health Ministry said. And there are witnesses to it. You know how far his farm is from the border? 1 kilometer. He's not even in the protest. He was farming. Well, maybe he was farming some dangerous stuff, so let's find out. Yasser Samur, a relative of the farmer killed by a shell, Amr Samur, said Amr was harvesting parsley before dawn in hopes of selling it fresh in the market later in the day. Parsley. They fired a tank shell. You thought you were in imminent danger from a guy 1 kilometer away planting parsley, and you just had to kill him. This is not good for anybody. They have to find a way to end this occupation. Look, it is super easy for me to say, sitting in a comfortable studio, that they should walk, because a lot of them will die. But it would be the bravest thing I have ever seen. Way smarter and way braver than an act of violence, suicide, bombing. All of that is absolutely pointless, immoral, and counterproductive. But if 35,000 people or more walk to the border, and they stated their intention that we're not going to go and just occupy Israel. How the hell would they occupy Israel anyway? They have no weapons. If they stated their intention to simply symbolically cross that border, or in areas where there's a wall, to tear down the wall. And if they declared ahead of time, Mr. Netanyahu, tear down that wall, and they went and did it, it would be amazing. But they must keep it nonviolent. If they keep it nonviolent and the Israeli Defense Forces start executing them en masse, they will lose the world. At some point, I know how many resolutions have been passed against Israel. I know the United Nations has been relatively clear. I know that the United States is an immovable object, and they will block every vote in the United Nations that has any force. But at some point, the entire world saying enough has got to make a difference. For God's sake, do not do violence. This is an amazing protest. If you can, and like I said, I don't know that I would do it, and it would take extraordinary courage. Walk to the border. Young Turks. No hate on Joe Kennedy. He's just a standard politician, speaking in standard cadence. He's a young guy. He's trying to learn the ropes, yada yada. But more important than him sounding fake and Bernie Sanders sounding real is the substance. So he gave Kennedy gave the stories of the family in Pittsburgh and the this and that, and Bernie jumped right into the numbers. And he's like, look, here's the context. Yes, unemployment is down, but the context of that is how much unemployment has fallen under Obama, and in fact, we've added the fewest jobs since 2010. That's super important context, and other politicians might think, oh, that'll bore the audience. No, the audience loves that. Look, we want to know that.
They love it because they're living it, right? So
one of the things that I realized under Obama is, yes, the economy overall did improve, but since wages didn't improve much, a lot of Americans were bitter and angry toward him and Democrats, right? Which is what kind of paved the way for, unfortunately, someone like Trump. And what Bernie's doing, at least in the beginning of his speech, is saying, yeah, okay, sure, we'll give him that. The unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in a long time, but let's talk about wages. You know, that's something that a lot of people care about, and I think that it's a miscalculation by other politicians to think that it's going to bore people to get into the numbers.
He touched all the important things. He talked about, he said, why didn't he talk about climate change, something massively important to the world?
Criminal justice reform.
And Citizens United. What happened? I thought you were going to drain the swamp. And all of a sudden, not a word about Citizens United or getting money out of politics or the corruption in Washington. College for all the things that Trump didn't talk about. And we've got it now. I want to show you video 13. We literally asked for this before Bernie's speech began, and the guy always delivers here. Let's take a look at video 13.
We need to seriously address the issue of immigration, but that does not mean dividing families and reducing legal immigration by 25 to 50%. It surely does not mean forcing the taxpayers of our country to spend $25 billion on a wall that candidate Trump promised us that Mexico would pay for.
The high school jock who was so mean to you, hated you, picked on you on Instagram. Hey, I think you're really sexy. I've always thought you were sexy.
No way.
Totally.
No. That happened to you?
Yeah, here's the thing that made me mad about that. It was bro, we could have been super tight. We could have been really tight. But but here's the thing though too. Now you're not sexy.
Why?
Because I feel like when you're an ugly duckling in I was kind of ugly in high school, and then you blossom into this hot, sexy chocolate thing that I am now. Just kidding. And you're just nah, I'm good. But see, gaydar doesn't develop. It's like mutant powers. It develops as you get older and becomes more powerful. Now I'm in my 30s, my gaydar is bam. But back in 98, 99. You're gay? Really? You just didn't know because you're still trying to figure yourself out.
I got a bunch of things to go through. No Republican would have ever voted for Bernie. He would have done worse than Hillary Clinton.
You're so miserable. All right, let me stop myself. So I say things in your country.
If I ran for office, and that would be a trippy day, right? I'd break even more rules than Trump. If I had all the money in the world, I would enjoy that. We have a great show for you. Steve's answer is C. Dave's is A, and the correct answer is, of course, B. You guys are the worst. Here's the story, and it's not funny. It's over too. The Democratic Party just sucks right now. It just sucks because no one stands for it. We should go. Right. Alright, back in the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Joy wrote in, seems the Israeli military has been taking tips from U.S. police officers. And actually a lot of people share that sentiment. Pablo Lamy wrote in with a similar sentiment. Smooth talked about how it reminded him of Standing Rock. Of course, luckily people didn't get killed in Standing Rock. Adrian Ginn said, agreed, it will be horrible, but if they all show up and slowly walk peacefully, what would they do? What could they do? I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm almost positive I wouldn't have the courage to do it. But if 35,000 or more people walk towards that border, I don't know what happens. But it would be one of the most amazing and courageous nonviolent protests in world history. Last thing, unrelated, Eric Wynn wrote in, Cenk, how about a shout out for Allison Hartson and her campaign store, AllisonHartson.com/store. Bless your heart for that. I'd rather do a shout out for volunteers or donations, but we're trying to get 2,000 volunteers for Allison. AllisonHartson.com/now. There's only about 2 months left before the voting, before the primary, so you got to get out there and support real progressives. So name the issue, any issue. Dianne Feinstein will not fight for you. You've got to get Allison Hartson in there. So AllisonHartson.com/now. Let's get more volunteers so we can knock on more doors and make more calls. You can do it. You can volunteer from anywhere in the country. It doesn't have to be California. You can call in. Makes a giant difference. Okay, Anna, what's next?
All right.
Donald Trump went on another Twitter spree where he attacked undocumented immigrants and also Mexico for allegedly not doing enough to prevent undocumented immigrants from coming into the country. Now, his Twitter tirade began on Easter Sunday and continued today, and I will give you just a little taste of what Trump was tweeting. One of his tweets said, "Border Patrol agents are not allowed to properly do their job at the border because of ridiculous liberal," and then in parentheses, "Democrat laws like catch and release, getting more dangerous, caravans," in quotations, coming. "Republicans must go to nuclear option to pass tough laws now, no more DACA deal." Now, the nuclear option that he's referring to is essentially Congress passing an anti-immigration law or a border funding bill with a simple majority rather than having the 60 votes necessary in the Senate to pass this legislation. Now,
can I just jump in for a quick second there, Anna? So to give you context on that, it basically be to kill the filibuster. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Republicans did that at some points, but some Republicans are resisting that in the Senate. But it doesn't really matter. But of course, Trump has no sense of the vote count or pretty much anything related to policy. So he only has 36 Republican senators who back him on his specific proposal. So even if they killed the filibuster and went with the nuclear option, and anybody want to take a guess that he even knows what the nuclear option actually means, he probably just thinks that it sounds tough and cool. Anyway, he'd only have 36 votes. He wouldn't win anyway.
So where did this rant come from? Well, apparently he had just watched a Fox News segment
It's almost there.
I just received my gun safe from Old Glory. I'm very pleased with it. This is a BR Series 5930. What caught my attention about the safe when I was looking online and in person was it had the highest fire protection rating that I could find. It was 2 full hours at 1,880 degrees, which is far superior of the other safes that I found. The average rating of the safes that I could find locally or on the internet were like 30 minutes for 1,200 degrees, or the best I found closest to it was 75 minutes for 1,500 degrees. So this BR series is by far superior. One of the most obvious features on this safe is there's 3 large hinges versus 2 hinges that are standard on most of the safes that you look at. When you open the door, the first thing you notice is the large 1.5-inch diameter deadbolts, and there's 20. The deadbolts are top and bottom and each side. The next thing you notice is when you open the door is a motion lighting sensor that kicks on. And so you have these blue lights as soon as the door opens, and you also have a built-in dehumidifier. The door is made out of a 4-gauge metal. It's 5 inches thick to hold all that fire retardant. The overall construction is 10-gauge metal versus 12-gauge. So I'm very pleased with the safe, and I just like to share.
Really bad schools? Maybe try to figure out what they're doing?
I have not intentionally visited schools that are underperforming.
Maybe you should.
Maybe I should. Yes. I have not intentionally visited failing schools. Like, has she accidentally stumbled into a failing school? Unwittingly stumbled into a failing school? The point is, she doesn't intentionally visit failing schools, and then she has the audacity to sit there as someone who has no prior experience in education whatsoever and try to make a claim that privatizing schools and pushing for charter schools creates a better school system in any given state. It's complete and utter BS, and we all know it.
Let's bring up the chart again. You're going to see the differences in incarceration rate between, on the left hand, females, white and black, and on the right-hand side, males, white and black. I am going to guess that some conservatives are going to look at that and say, well, there's your explanation right there. They're going to stop thinking and say, oh, well, they go to jail a bunch.
Reading through the study, what it is a consistent confirmation of what black folks have been saying for decades. And then what people don't believe because they just go, stop complaining. Slavery was over hundreds of years ago. We've made a lot of progress. Just pick yourself up by your bootstraps, or stop committing crimes. All those things would be said. And then this is the one they may still try to hang their hat on. But then you have to consider other studies that say black and white folks commit the same, like as far as like the crimes, as far as drug possession. Let's just go there. Yet black folks are incarcerated at like 3 to 4 times at a higher level than their white counterparts that commit the same crimes.
Yeah.
Again,
that's an important point.
Yes.
The same crime.
So it's incarceration rates versus crime rates. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
Crime rates are the same. The incarceration rates are different. That means the justice system that black folks have been complaining about forever, that's part of the problem. It's an indictment of the way our justice system works.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to accept that we do things wrong in this country. You can fix and change things, make things even. This equality approach that we want to go for isn't always met.
All right, back on the Young Turks, Jake and Anna with you. Our members of the day are Whittled Ferens and Caroline Geese. Today on the postgame, I'll tell you, I went to Jamaica. Did anybody recognize me as Mr. Jamaica? Well, hold. You're going to love that story. tytnetwork.com/join to become a member. All right, what's next, Anna?
All right. Ronald Kessler was speaking to Jake Tapper over the weekend on CNN State of the Union, and Kessler's coming out with a book soon. In fact, it's coming out tomorrow, called The Trump White House Changing the Rules of the Game. And during his interview, he had some interesting things to say about Kellyanne Conway. Take a look.
Kellyanne at the White House, she forgot that she was on the record, and she started lashing into Reince Priebus. She said the most mean, cutting, and obviously untrue things about Reince, and I didn't include them in the book because they were so unfair. She also led into Jared and Ivanka saying that they leak against Steve Bannon. I know that White House aides have seen texts that she has sent to other journalists dissing her colleagues, leaking material. So if you wonder, why there are so many leaks out of the White House, one reason is Kellyanne is the number one leaker.
So that was an interesting statement because when I really think about it, whenever there are leaks, they're never negative toward Kellyanne Conway. They're usually negative toward other people. So I could totally believe that she's one of the biggest leakers. Also, her husband has been quietly attempting to delete some of his critical tweets toward Trump. And that's a curious move on his part. But Kellyanne Conway is like, let's go away from this for a second. Let's go. Kellyanne Conway spoke to Fox and dismissed claims that she's the number one leaker. But my prediction is, not only is she the number one leaker, she will be gone very soon. It's already begun. The seed has been planted.
I like that you're doing a prediction, Anna.
Mm-hmm.
I as soon as I heard this, I was like, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why it's coming out now. So maybe the daggers are out for her. She's obviously out for a communications director. That's why other people might now be leaking against her, having been the victims of her leaks. But I actually think if she is the leaker, that's awesome. Okay, that's a positive for Kellyanne Conway I didn't realize existed. And her husband is Conway Twitty because he has been tweeting like a madman. Actually against Trump. He says, no, I support the president, I support my wife who supports the president, but he's got a funny way of showing it. So there's some chance that the Conways are secretly not big fans of Trump, so it's a twofer. I mean, and the main thing at twofer where they leak against their enemies and are secretly like, get out, make sure you get them out. But the main thing that he leaked was, it's impossible, he supported someone else writing, it's impossible to work for Donald Trump because he makes people who work for him say something and then changes his mind and throws them under the bus.
That's right.
Gee, I wonder who he's talking about. Drums. All right, I got Rebel Headquarters coming up next. You'll love it. Bye-bye. Welcome to Rebel Headquarters. One of the things that we try to do on this program is to let you know about elections that are coming up. It is, of course, always important to get progressives into all these different seats. So I want to tell you about one today. Tomorrow there is going to be a special election in California for the California State Assembly districts in 39, 45, and 54. I'm going to tell you this a couple times. If you want to find out where to vote, go to lavote.net/locator. Easy enough, lavote.net/locator. We always have the links down below wherever you're watching this. And I want to tell you specifically about Assembly District 45, where Ankur Patel is running. That's the West San Fernando Valley. Ankur Patel is endorsed by Our Revolution National and by California Nurse Association. So you know that he's really progressive. He's a champion for single-payer health care. And in California, that is very relevant. If you are in the Assembly, you can actually vote on that and make a world of difference. And he's also for climate mobilization to make California the leading fighter against the fossil fuel industry. That election is happening tomorrow, so get out there and vote, especially in these special elections where you have really low voter turnout. That is a chance to get real progressives into office. If you're more passionate about the issues and you care more, you can make all the difference. So be part of the solution. In this case, lavote.net/locator to find out a polling district near you. Go out there and vote and participate. Take power back. Okay, now it's a good day for Patels on the program because I'm going to go to someone else named Patel, unrelated to this. Welcoming Suraj Patel to the show. He is running in New York's 12th district for Congress. The incumbent there is Carolyn Maloney. So, first of all, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
First question is, why? Why run against a Democratic incumbent?
What a missed opportunity it would be if we let these kinds of safe, heavily progressive, heavily influential and educated districts not be leading the way boldly and progressively with policy. I'm challenging in this district because Democrats don't challenge each other enough. And we are so complacent in some of our safest seats that we're missing a massive opportunity to lead intellectually and form the basis of like a sound, future-oriented progressive policy. And it maybe was good enough, 10 years ago or 5 years ago to just serve in these seats. But this last election shows us that unless Democrats start really being boldly progressive and giving people something to vote for, an agenda to vote for, that we're missing a big opportunity. So I just don't believe that it's okay to issue the right press release and take good votes on bad bills and lose, and then do and move on. And so we don't have the luxury to be complacent.
So do I have this right? Is this district so blue that there's not even a Republican candidate in the race?
That's exactly right. So blue, no announced Republican candidate. Huge Hillary turnout or margin. I can't remember what the exact number is, like 80% or something. So yeah, I mean, this is like one of the bluest districts in America.
And how about Carolyn Maloney, the incumbent? What about her do you find not progressive enough?
Well, look, the main issue for me is reforming our democracy, right? The representation we have in this country is significantly misrepresentative of the population as a whole. It's much more conservative than we are. And that's because of gerrymandering, because of voter suppression, and because of the corrosive influence of money in politics. Now, I can't believe that someone who hasn't had a progressive challenge in 24 years, nor a Republican challenger, still takes corporate PAC money from the very same industry she regulates, Wall Street, primarily, and real estate and stuff like that, and healthcare. And I just don't understand how you can say you're for corporate training Citizens United, but then take corporate PAC money, and then regulate Wall Street with kid gloves. She also voted for the Iraq War, and more recently against the Iran deal. Now, that puts her in league with Donald Trump and not with Barack Obama on the Iran deal. And I just don't understand what kind of person would want that judgment to want to give someone like Donald Trump the discretion on renegotiating a nuclear deal is beyond me. And then I think one last thing I'd say, the era of triangulation in the Democratic Party ends with our generation. That the 1994 crime bill that put mandatory minimums and sort of signaled to the rest of the country to throw the key at so many people. 1 out of every 6 black males are put in prison by the time they're, or incarcerated, or on parole by the time they're 30 in this country. That is not a reflection of our generation's values. It's not a reflection of what the Democratic Party should be. We triangulated to look tough on crime. That's a stain in our legacy. She voted for that bill, and that generation of Democrats did. And then the same one, 1996 immigration bill. ICE is now a 50-state deportation squad, thanks to the discretion Donald Trump has to using this border security and customs enforcement force as his own terrorizing sort of 50-state mass deportation squad. And I was one of the first candidates. I was the first candidate in New York to call for a full defunding of ICE if Democrats take back the House in November. And it's because it's a moral imperative. If we know that the president is a racist and he's going to use this tool in a way that is arbitrary, capricious, and that is race-based, then we ought to not give that to him. And so he's only using tools Congress gives him, and we ought not to give it back to him. These are things that Carolyn Maloney and I definitely disagree on, and you should ask her on your show.
Okay, well, I'd love to. Maybe we could do that. So I know that you're animated on the immigration issue. You volunteered as an attorney to protect immigrants facing deportation on the Muslim ban. So I'm just going to guess based on your name that you were probably born Hindu, and people might not know, but in the old world, Hindus and Muslims have rocky relationship. So in a sense, I guess Trump has brought us together, right? As you go out there fighting for Muslim Americans. Do you see a silver lining in that?
I see.
Okay.
What's that?
I said, yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's his one positive legacy. He found a solution to a 2,000-year problem.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What motivated you to jump out there and do that?
Well, look, I'm a first-generation American. My family moved here from India in staggered places. My great-uncle moved here in 1960. A few years later, he called his brother over, and then then they called their wives over, and then my dad eventually in 1970. And so, really, long story short, I am the end of a long line of chain migrants, otherwise known as a family. And this is a near and dear issue to my heart, these social justice issues especially. But I think we, have an obligation to protect the most marginalized in our societies, and we circle the wagons around the ones that are being attacked by their own government and by forces of hate. And in this case, this president clearly shows a profound disregard and a lack of respect for our Muslim brothers and sisters who have every right to be in this country just like you and I do. The First Amendment guarantees that. We don't impose religious tests on people here, and so we're going to circle the wagons for the people that they're coming for. And so I thought that was obviously a really important issue when that came down. And I live near JFK, and I'm an attorney by training, and I decided to head out there and be part of the ACLU's effort just for 1 weekend. But it was pretty crazy, but that's just the world we live in right now. We've got to all roll up our sleeves and do something.
So, Suraj, I don't doubt your education because I see here that you studied political science at Stanford. You got your law degree at NYU, which is a great law school, and you got a scholarship at Cambridge, and the list goes on and on. But I'm sure the audience is wondering, as they do in all of these races, you made your case against Carolyn Maloney, but how do we know you're the most progressive in the race overall? Because there are other Democrats.
I believe that it's only going to be two of us in this race. So I'm definitely more progressive than her. And look, I mean, I worked for both. I went to law school at NYU. I was super inspired and left to join the Obama campaign, first as a field organizer, and then doing advance flying around and helping set up events and rallies and stuff like that. I understand the power of a positive movement for social change. I understand how people react when we include more people in the process, when we listen to people and give them something to vote for rather than a lot of things to vote against. And that seems to be lacking, generally speaking. I'm looking at, this whole year after the last election, I helped start an organization called The Arena to get young people to jump in the political arena. We thought there was a dearth of authentic, progressive voices running for office. And over the course of the year, I've been sitting there watching as people are launching candidacies and seeing how consultants from the DCCC and DNC surround even good, like legitimate candidates, and then put them in a box to raise a ton of money and blow it all on TV and mail 6 weeks after the election with their affiliated buddy mail and TV firms and all that. And I realized, wow, the way we do politics is broken. We're taking real progressives and beat that out of them by the time they get out the other side in November. And it leads to a very uninspiring politics that leads to 26% of America giving us Donald Trump, with about half America so checked out they don't even bother to vote because they have nothing to be voting for. And to put it in perspective, Cenk, this district that I'm in, the only election of consequence is the primary. And yet, last 2 cycles, approximately 8% of people decided to go out and vote in the primary. Now we're talking about a free activity on a beautiful June 26th morning that takes 15 minutes of your time, and you can't even go do that because so many people feel so uninspired, so checked out, and removed from politics that they can't go make a decision, or don't go make a decision. And it's just, if the status quo, if the establishment is satisfied with an 8% type turnout, if that few voices, and only one person is selling policy the whole time in this marketplace, that's just not an establishment and a status quo that I find acceptable, right? And I think we just have to have more voices and more people. Now, I'm giving New York, for the first time in a quarter century, a progressive choice. That none of these folks who occupy some of these districts in touching Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens have even had a legitimate challenger, let alone a legitimate progressive challenger, ever. I think Gail Maloney's only ever had one primary challenger in 2010. That was actually a serious challenger, well funded, all those kinds of things. And that person challenged her as on a pro Wall Street platform after TARP. And so, really, New York hasn't had a choice, a true progressive choice.
So, Suraj, we're out of time, so I'm going to do yes and no on these policy positions real quick. Medicare for all.
Yes.
Taking money out of politics, not taking corporate cash.
Done.
Pathway to citizenship for dreamers.
Obviously, and the other 11 million undocumented immigrants living in this country.
Legalization of marijuana.
Yep.
And how about one last one that's harder than a yes or no? Term limits.
I am supportive of term limits. I don't know what that length is right off the top of my head, and we've been talking about and kicking around putting out that policy, but I am a fan of term limits. I don't believe anybody should be turning themselves into a career politician in the same office and getting comfortable and complacent because of it. I personally, think that 8 years in 4 congressional terms is sufficient. And if you're not accomplishing more after that, this is the thing. Like, I don't know whether that's 2 terms for Senate and 4 terms for House or what. But yes, I am for term limits, and we're open to listening to arguments about what that length ought to be.
So it's out of the box thinking. I like it, and you're giving people a different choice, which I appreciate as well. To me, you're absolutely right about one thing, undoubtedly, although I agree with you on many things, which is primaries are monumentally important, and that's where you get to make real decisions. By the time you get to the general election, it's almost always a false choice. So everybody check out the links here. Suraj Patel at .nyc. That's the website, surajpatel.nyc. And then you get the donation link, the volunteer link. Those are all really, really important. And those links are all at the bottom of the video, in the description box on YouTube, in the comment section on Facebook. Suraj Patel, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
All right. We're going to come back with a woman running for governor of California. She's been involved in California politics a long time. Can she defeat the giants running in that race? We will talk about it when we return. reporters. We've got a great interview for you guys now. In studio is Delane Easton. She's running for governor in California, along with 30 other people.
I think the total was 27, so 26 others.
Okay. Wow. So, Delane, there's an excellent case to be made that you're the most progressive. We'll talk about that in a second. You've been involved in California government for a long time, and so you've got that track record. We'll talk about that as well. But obviously there's some giants in this race, big known names. So talk to me about your plan to take down the giants.
Well, first, thank you for having me on, and I really do appreciate your show and your stands on the issues. And I really believe that the state has a lot of people in it that are hungry for somebody who is authentic, who really does understand not only government, and I'm the only candidate that's been in local government as a city council member, who's been in the state legislature, and who's been a statewide constitutional officer. So I have had all those jobs, but I left the political stage for a while. I went back and ran the National Institute for School Leadership in Washington, and then I came back to California and was a Mills College professor. I thought I was done, but I watched as California was disinvesting in education, and I had a lot of people asking me to please get back into politics, to stand up for children, yes, for health care, yes, for housing, and yes, for the environment. And I decided that I would do that. I came back.
So, do you take corporate PAC money? Or no?
I do not take corporate money at all. And I really feel that right now that's one of our problems. People say a lot of nice things, but then they're, in taking money from all sorts of big oil and big pharma and big tobacco, and then when push comes to shove, they don't really want to do the right thing.
You want to name any names of people taking corporate PAC money?
I don't think I have to. I think most people know. I'll just say, though, that, for example, when push came to shove, the tobacco industry put a tax, to put a tax against the tax we had put on. We added a tax to chewing tobacco, pipe tobacco, snuff, and cigars. They had zero taxation. We put a tax on those products. I was the honorary co-chair of the campaign. We put the money into educating kids about the dangers of smoking. And tobacco got in bed with the leaders of both parties and stole that money. They cried crocodile tears. They said they were giving it to the elderly, blind, and disabled. And that was more important than what the voters had done, was just to give the money to educate children about the dangers of smoking. And I was part of the lawsuit that reversed that. And in fact, it had even more implications, because the court ruled that from now on, when the voters say they want to tax themselves to do something, you have to go back and get their permission. So when Arnold Schwarzenegger tried to steal the money from First Five, from preschool and child development, and from mental health, he had to put it on the ballot. And the voters, by almost a 2-to-1 margin, turned him down.
Yeah. It's so sad how progressively more insane the Republican Party has got. So Schwarzenegger was right-wing Republican in a lot of ways. He claimed to be a moderate, but he did what you claim. Now he's fighting against a guy who's even more insanely right-wing in office. So it's unfortunately in a lot of ways getting worse. But in California, at least, there's folks to fight back. When was that the tobacco fight?
The tobacco fight comes in 94, and they were saying they were really trying to balance the budget, and that this was, money they hated to take, but they were in bed with big tobacco. And, that's the legislature doesn't pass tobacco taxes, the public passes it. They don't have the courage to pass it. Imagine that there was zero taxation on chewing tobacco, pipe tobacco, snuff, and cigars, and people with a straight face opposed that tax, saying it would hurt the poor. How many poor people do you know sitting around smoking $20 cigars?
Well, that's another issue too, right? So I remember when California started taking all the action against tobacco, no smoking indoors. Back then I was a Republican. I have gone in the opposite direction of the Republican Party. As they've got more right-wing, I got way more left-wing. And I thought, oh, well, that's taking freedom away. Boy, was I wrong. And I think with the actions that you helped participate in, you saved hundreds of thousands of lives in California?
Well, I've seen it all. My mother was a smoker who died of lung cancer at the age of 67. So I know that they're coffin nails. That's what my dad always called them. He didn't smoke himself. And he said it was, even when the reports first came out, tobacco tried to say, oh, it really wasn't bad for you. In fact, if anything, tobacco had a calming influence. They knew perfectly well it was bad for you. So some of these people actually look you right in the eye and tell you big tales. And the fact is, if it walks like a duck and it flies like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And tobacco is very bad for people.
Yeah. Well, you're awfully calm when you pass away. And so, unfortunately, that's what happened to a lot of folks as they did propaganda over and over again. So you've got a history of fighting for kids. You've got a history of fighting for progressive issues. But let's talk about today. Out of the 27 people, this is a question I probably ask most often on the show. How do folks know you're the most progressive person in the race, if you claim to be most progressive?
Well, I think I am the most progressive. I mean, if you look at my history, what you'll see is that I've fought consistently to take on the big bad actors. So I was on the Union City City Council, and I fought for mobile home rent control. We had 3 mobile home parks, the biggest of which was a senior park, and the guy who owned it was gouging those seniors. He'd gotten a huge tax break with Prop 13, but he was still sticking it to those people. I fought for mobile home rent control, and I won. Then I fought to get PG&E, went to the state of California and got a permit to put PCBs right downtown Union City in an unguarded park with not good fencing, right next to the BART station, a block from the high school, 3 blocks from an elementary school, near not only downtown but near housing, and right below the Masonic home where the average age was 86 years of age. The most dangerous place you ever could have put something like that. They didn't even tell the city it was there. We found out about it inadvertently. So we sued PG&E to get that stuff out of there. And they countersued us as individuals. A couple of the council members got cold feet. But I stood with the majority of the council, and we defeated PG&E, and they got that stuff out of town. In Union City, I fought to reclaim that piece of land and 2 other big factories, and we cleaned those sites, and we built multi-story affordable housing right next to BART. Everybody loves it. You know why? They walk around the corner and get on a BART train to go to work. They don't even have to move their cars. And it's good for the kids. They can walk to the school. They can walk to downtown. It's been, so I learned a lot about housing. And when I got to the legislature, I fought for, at first, I wasn't allowed to be on the education committee, which was my love, but I fought for a whole series of long-range planning things. State of California has a long-range water plan. I won't say we don't do any planning. Our long-range water plan dates to 1957. Pat Brown did it. Wow. So there's some long-range thinking that isn't happening in Sacramento. There's some things that we could do to make our agencies more responsive, more nimble, more able to respond to people. So it isn't just about my real, passion for making sure that we have a better education and great transportation and, much more housing that's affordable near transit hubs. But it's also the idea that we have to do some long-range thinking, and somehow we stopped doing that. The Higher Ed Master Plan dates to 1960.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yes, it is. So one specific question for you. If you're the governor, how do you want single payer in California? And if so, how would you get it?
I support single payer, and I have right along. I have not equivocated, unlike at least one other candidate who's on the bus and off the bus, and now on the bus again. But the fact is that we are spending more, and we have people that are sicker, that are going bankrupt, that are dying because we don't have a system to cover everybody. If you look at the rest of the first world, Canada, most of Europe, what you'll see is they have some system of guaranteed health care. And they don't have these extraordinarily high pharmaceutical costs where people are lining their pockets at the expense many times of working class families and poor people. So I think it's time that we did single payer. And yes, it will be a heavy lift. In the short run, it costs more. In the long run, it saves money. Because in the long run, people are healthier. But we can't do this. It just means you have to have, a brass backbone and some imagination and a willingness to make things happen.
All right, and you've shown that over and over. Let's show the links to everybody. DelaneForGovernor.com is the website. Then you got the donation and volunteer link. As always, if you're watching this on YouTube, that'll be in the comment section. Just easy peasy, just click on it. And even if you're not sure yet, go to the website, look around, find Delane's position, see if you agree. and then get involved because that makes all the difference. And on Facebook, it'll be in the comment section. Delaney, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
So happy to be with you. And we're going to fight for these kids from preschool to graduate school. We're going to fight for their families. We're going to fight for the future.
All right. Great to have you.
Great to be here.
All right, guys. We'll be right back for the members for the post game.